My colleague turned the office against me, and even my family didn't support me. Yet years later, they had to watch me succeed. I had always thought my office was just normal. You know, the usual mix of personalities, occasional small talk, people keeping mostly to themselves. But then Mark came along, and something shifted in a way I hadn't expected. At first, he seemed harmless enough, friendly, helpful with reports, cracking a joke now and then. But there was this subtle tension in the way he looked at me, like he was quietly measuring every word I said, waiting for a moment to pounce. I shrugged it off, thinking I was imagining things, but little signs started to pile up. It began with whispers that would abruptly stop when I entered the room. I'd catch someone looking at me strangely, then glancing away, pretending nothing happened. Then came the comments, small, subtle, easily dismissible, but always directed at me. Numbers can be tricky, can't they? He'd say with a sly smile. Or funny how things sometimes go missing, right? At first, I laughed nervously, pretending I didn't hear him, but deep down, my stomach twisted. It wasn't that I had anything to hide. I hadn't, but I could feel the room slowly turning against me. Team lunches, once routine, became selective. Invitations that had been automatic suddenly vanished. Emails were left unanswered, meetings held without me, casual, oops, we forgot to include you moments happening repeatedly, almost as if scripted. And the worst part? My family, who I had hoped might back me up or at least understand, seemed oblivious. They brushed off my concerns as stress or overthinking, and I began questioning myself, wondering if maybe I really was imagining things to be why the end of the first week, the pattern was undeniable. People I had considered colleagues now avoided eye contact. Even casual greetings became strained, awkward, or non-existent. And Mark, he seemed to thrive on it, smiling just a little too long when someone whispered near him, glancing my way. Like a predator checking its prey. I realized this wasn't about simple office politics anymore. It was personal. The breaking point came during a Friday meeting. Mark made a comment so pointed, so laced with insinuation, that half the team exchanged glances and smirked. Well, if anyone knows about missing funds, it's you, isn't it? He said. My chest tightened, my hands shook, and I felt every eye on me. I wanted to shout, defend myself, make them see the truth, but fear of being blamed unfairly kept me frozen. I knew, at that moment, that this wasn't a joke or misunderstanding. This was a campaign, and it had only just begun. I left that meeting with a pounding heart, wandering the empty hallways, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, the faint smell of coffee lingering. In the air, I kept replaying his words, over and over, wondering if anyone else had heard the underlying thread in his tone. This wasn't just office drama. It was an attack on my career, my reputation, and I could feel the weight of it pressing down on me. After that day, I started noticing more patterns. Files would mysteriously vanish from my desk, and when I asked about them, people would shrug or pretend they didn't see anything. Emails that clearly needed my input were rerouted without explanation. I began logging everything, writing notes, keeping track of odd behaviors, because I couldn't trust anyone's word anymore. The office I had once considered safe had turned into a maze of suspicion. That Mark's little manipulations weren't just limited to me. They started spreading. He whispered to others, planting tiny seeds of doubt. I think you might have missed something in the report, he'd say casually, looking at someone else, but somehow ensuring I heard it. People started treating me differently. Friendly. Colleagues became cold, helpful teammates became distant, and meetings became a silent battlefield. I could feel myself shrinking under the weight of constant judgment and suspicion. Home was no refuge either. I would vent to my family, hoping they'd understand, hoping for a simple, "That's ridiculous, you're being targeted." But their responses were the opposite. "Maybe you're overreacting," my sister said. "Just ignore it and it'll blow over," my dad added. I was shocked. My own family, who I thought would have my back, was treating my fears like I was, making them up. That isolation hurt more than the office hostility itself. That I tried confronting Mark once, cautiously. "Why are you always whispering and smirking like that?" I asked in the break room, my voice tight with nerves. He just smiled, shrugged, and replied, "I don't know what you mean. Maybe it's all in your head." The casualness, the denial, made my stomach churn. He had built a perfect little world where I looked paranoid no matter what I said or did. Days turned into weeks, and the tension never eased. I started losing sleep, replaying every conversation, analyzing every glance, wondering if I had missed a clue that could help me defend myself. The stress was crushing. I felt trapped in my own life, and the irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, working hard, being diligent, yet everyone around me seemed determined to make me look incompetent or guilty. It wasn't just frustrating, it was soul-crushing. Then came the whispering campaign's first major strike. A rumor about a supposed mishandling of funds spread across the office like wildfire. I heard it in the cafeteria first, someone muttering, "Did you hear about the missing budget items?" I heard it was them. My heart sank. I tried to speak up, to clarify, but my voice felt small against the wave of disbelief and side glances. My reputation was slipping away, and I couldn't reach for help. It felt like everyone had been carefully prepared to doubt me. By this point, I realized something fundamental. If I wanted to survive, I couldn't rely on anyone else. I started strategics, planning how to document everything meticulously, gathering evidence quietly, and preparing for the day I could expose the truth. I became hyper-aware, cautious with every interaction, but determined not to let this situation destroy me. The office had become a battlefield, and I had to learn how to fight without drawing fired. I started keeping a private journal of every interaction, every suspicious glance, and every strange comment. At first, it felt obsessive, but soon it became my lifeline. Looking back, I could see patterns forming. Mark had been orchestrating things long before I realized it. I noted who would avoid eye contact when he spoke, who would suddenly agree with him on small points, who would silently gawk when I entered the room. Each entry in that journal was a small victory, a step toward reclaiming some control. Then there was the day that nearly broke me. A critical project I had been leading was suddenly reassigned. I wasn't given a reason. It was just quietly handed over to someone else. My heart sank as I watched them sit in my office, surrounded by my notes and carefully curated documents, pretending that all the groundwork was theirs. I felt invisible, yet painfully exposed at the same time. The office felt colder than ever, the air heavy with whispered judgments that I could hear but couldn't respond to. I tried reaching out to HR, hoping they'd see the pattern and intervene. But the first time I brought up my concerns, the response was lukewarm, filled with vague advice about team dynamics and professionalism. It was clear they didn't want to take a side or confront someone as subtle and manipulative as Mark. Every attempt I made to defend myself only seemed to isolate me further. It was frustrating beyond words, like screaming in a vacuum. The stress began seeping into my personal life. I was exhausted, anxious, constantly rehashing the office events in my head. Nights were sleepless, mornings were heavy, and every trip to work felt like stepping into a battlefield where my reputation was constantly under attack. Even simple conversations with colleagues felt like potential traps. I became cautious, calculating, overly conscious of every word and gesture. My anxiety grew, but I also became sharper, more aware. I was learning to survive in an environment that seemed designed to crush me. One evening, after another long day of whispered rumors and side glances, I realized I couldn't keep living like this. I needed a plan that didn't just protect me, but would expose the truth. I started gathering emails, screenshots, documents, anything that could show the extent of Mark's manipulation. It wasn't just about proving him wrong anymore. It was about reclaiming my dignity. I wanted to take back control over my life, piece by piece, evidence by evidence. Slowly, I started sharing pieces of the evidence with trusted colleagues, carefully, selecting who could be relied upon to understand the truth. Some were shocked, others reluctant, but the reactions began to shift. Small cracks appeared in Mark's carefully constructed facade. I was no longer invisible. I was a presence, a force that could counteract the lies with documented facts. It was empowering. Even amidst the continued tension, things started to shift slowly. I noticed colleagues hesitating before agreeing with Mark. Glances exchanged that once seemed secretive now tinged with doubt. I realized that my careful documentation and selective sharing were starting to work. Small victories gave me a sense of momentum I hadn't felt in months. The anxiety that had weighed on me began to lift in tiny increments. replaced by a cautious optimism. During this time, I also began rebuilding connections with people I had distanced myself from. Some had been manipulated, some intimidated, but all were open to hearing my side once I presented the facts clearly. I scheduled informal meetings, walked through situations calmly, and let them see the timeline I had meticulously compiled. Watching their understanding grow was strangely satisfying, like witnessing pieces of a puzzle finally click into place. Mark, of course, noticed the shift. His subtle digs became sharper, but they were met with raised eyebrows or pointed questions rather than blind agreement. I could see frustration flicker across his face, an unfamiliar emotion for him. The office had slowly become less of a battlefield and more of a chessboard, where each move mattered and the power balance was starting to even out. That I started keeping a mental tally of every small triumph, every time a colleague sided with facts over rumor. Each time, my confidence grew, but so did the stakes. I had to remain vigilant, ensuring that no slip could give Mark the upper hand again. It was exhausting, yes, but also strangely exhilarating. I had become strategic in ways I never expected, learning to anticipate moves, read subtle cues, and leverage alliances. One afternoon, a meeting was called by HR, ostensibly about team cohesion. I walked in prepared, documents in hand, quietly, confident. When Mark tried to subtly distort events, I countered with specifics, dates, emails, screenshots. The room was silent for a moment, colleagues exchanging glances. HR asked questions, probed inconsistencies, and for the first time, I felt the tide turning. Truth had a voice, and for once, it wasn't being drowned out by manipulation. The following weeks were a mix of relief and tension. Mark tried small power plays, but each was countered, each met with skepticism or evidence-based pushback. The office atmosphere began to shift noticeably. People became more willing to speak openly, share ideas, and collaborate without fear of invisible sabotage. I noticed a subtle camaraderie returning among the team, a quiet but powerful reclaiming of our workspace from the grip of deceit. Even as I gained ground, I remained cautious. Years of being undermined had taught me the cost of complacency. I documented everything, maintained careful records, and stayed alert to the undercurrents of office politics. The stress hadn't disappeared, but it had transformed into something manageable, a tool rather than a trap. I had learned to wield knowledge and patience as armor against manipulation. The changes weren't just professional. They seeped into my personal life in unexpected ways. I noticed that I was laughing more at home, reconnecting with friends I had neglected, and even taking weekends for myself without guilt. The constant anxiety that had shadowed me for years was loosening its grip, replaced by a cautious optimism. It was as if regaining control at work had given me permission to reclaim other parts of my life. Mark, now openly frustrated, began isolating himself. He tried to rally support from a few holdouts, but the momentum had shifted. Colleagues who once feared him now questioned his methods, and some openly criticized his tactics during meetings. Witnessing this reversal was satisfying, not because I relished in his failure, but because it validated my perseverance and judgment. I had endured months of manipulation, and now, through consistency and strategy, the truth had emerged victorious. I found solace in small victories, a project completed on time, a presentation that received genuine praise, a colleague acknowledging my contribution without prompting. Each moment, though seemingly minor, built a cumulative confidence that was palpable. It reminded me that long-term effort often outshines immediate triumphs. Patience, observation, and measured responses had become my greatest allies. One evening, while reviewing an old file of Mark's manipulations, I realized just how far things had come. Situations that had once seemed insurmountable now appeared trivial in comparison. I could dissect his strategies, predict moves, and preemptively act without drama. The office, which had felt like a battlefield, was now a space where I could operate with clarity and calm, a place where I could actually enjoy my work. Even my interactions with HR had transformed. They now sought my input, consulting me on matters of conflict resolution and policy implementation. The respect I had earned was subtle but genuine. It was a validation that extended beyond personal satisfaction. It signified a broader shift in the workplace culture, The lessons I had endured were no longer just survival tactics. They had become tools for improvement and leadership. With each passing day, Mark's attempts to regain influence grew more desperate. Yet, the team's growing cohesion and resilience rendered his efforts futile. Emails that once created panic now barely caused a ripple. People had learned to distinguish between baseless accusations and actionable concerns, and I had played a pivotal role in fostering that discernment. It was empowering to see others benefit from the lessons I had painfully acquired. I also began keeping a journal of strategies and insights, not as a weapon, but as a guide for myself and, potentially, for others facing similar challenges. Writing down each experience, noting the nuances of manipulation and response, created a clarity I hadn't realized I was missing. It was therapeutic and instructive, providing a roadmap for navigating difficult professional dynamics. By this point, the office atmosphere had shifted dramatically. Where tension and mistrust once dominated, there was now cautious collaboration. People approached each other with openness, sharing ideas without fear of covert sabotage. Even small wins, like successful team presentations, became collective celebrations rather than sparks for jealousy. The gradual transformation was tangible, and it reminded me that resilience and patience could reshape even the most toxic environments. Mark's influence continued to wane, and his frustration became increasingly visible. He attempted to undermine me in subtle ways, correcting minor details, questioning my decisions in meetings, but his efforts lacked the teeth they once had. Colleagues no longer accepted his claims without scrutiny, and many quietly supported me, citing my consistent professionalism. The shift was almost imperceptible to outsiders, but I could feel the balance of power tipping steadily in my favor. Outside the office, my personal growth mirrored the professional changes. I found myself more confident in social situations, more assertive in negotiations, and less anxious about confrontation. The months of stress had been brutal, but they had also forced me to develop skills I might never have cultivated otherwise. I realized that the challenges I had faced were not merely obstacles. They were shaping me into someone more capable and resilient. Small victories reinforced my confidence daily. A colleague publicly acknowledged my role in a successful project. Another asked for my advice on handling office politics. Each interaction served as a subtle affirmation that my endurance and strategic patience had paid off. It was empowering to see my influence not as a product of manipulation, but as a result of credibility, consistency, and calm authority. At home, life felt more balanced. I could enjoy weekends, engage in hobbies, and maintain friendships without the pervasive anxiety that had once dominated my thoughts. The boundary between work and personal life became clearer, and the psychological weight I had carried for months began to lift. I felt a sense of ownership over my time, my choices, and my responses, freedom that had been absent for far too long. That I also began mentoring new team members, quietly guiding them on how to navigate office dynamics and maintain professionalism under pressure. They looked to me as a source of insight, unaware of the depth of challenges I had overcome. Watching them grow, adapt, and succeed brought a profound satisfaction, reinforcing the idea that endurance and patience were not just personal strategies. They were lessons others could benefit from as well. Mark, increasingly isolated, resorted to erratic behavior. He would question decisions openly, challenge minor changes, and attempt to rally a few remaining supporters. Yet the team's cohesion, now grounded in mutual respect and trust, made his attempts largely ineffective. His anger, though noticeable, no longer commanded attention. It had lost its power over the environment. The turning point came during a high-stakes project that required everyone to collaborate closely. In the past, such a task would have been marred by secrecy, jealousy, and covert sabotage. Now the environment was almost unrecognizable. Team members communicated openly, shared updates willingly, and supported each other without hidden agendas. I found myself facilitating discussions rather than defending my position, a dramatic reversal from months earlier. Mark tried one last attempt to regain influence during a crucial presentation. He interjected repeatedly, questioning decisions and undermining confidence. Yet his words fell flat. The team had grown accustomed to scrutiny and knew how to respond calmly. The respect they had developed for me was now evident, and several colleagues subtly, but firmly countered his interruptions. The balance had shifted irreversibly, and Mark's frustration was palpable. At home, I noticed subtle changes in myself as well. I approached challenges with measured responses instead of impulsive reactions. My sleep improved, anxiety decreased, and I was able to enjoy simple pleasures. Coffee in the morning, walks in the park, or reading without a lingering sense of dread. The resilience I had cultivated at work now bolstered my personal life, giving me a renewed sense of control. The project succeeded beyond expectations. Clients praised the results, and leadership took notice of the transformation in the team's dynamics. My input was recognized, and unlike before, I didn't need to defend my contributions constantly. This success wasn't just about the project. It symbolized the culmination of months of effort, patience, and endurance against a toxic work culture. Witnessing this shift, I realized that change doesn't always happen overnight. The progress, though slow, had been deliberate, and deliberate actions compounded over time. Each small act of patience, observation, and assertiveness had led to this point. I understood that resilience wasn't just about surviving difficult situations. It was about actively shaping the outcome through strategy, consistency, and persistence. Mark finally began withdrawing from daily interactions, no longer able to manipulate or intimidate. He would occasionally send passive-aggressive emails or attempt subtle critiques, but the impact was negligible. His dominance had been broken, and the office was no longer a place dominated by fear or tension. The team had learned to operate with clarity, trust, and mutual respect, lessons that I had quietly nurtured over months. That I started documenting the journey for myself, writing down strategies, reflections, and lessons learned. Not as a brag, but as a personal record, a roadmap for navigating toxic dynamics in the future. I also considered sharing it anonymously with others, hoping that my experience might help someone facing similar challenges. The act of recording everything added another layer of clarity and closure. Why now? The office culture had completely transformed. The tension and fear that once hung over every meeting had been replaced by a sense of mutual respect and collaboration. People were genuinely willing to help one another, sharing knowledge and offering support without hidden motives. I noticed subtle gestures of camaraderie, a shared joke in the hallway, a colleague double-checking their work with me, another asking for my input voluntarily. These small moments underscored just how far the environment had shifted. Mark's presence became almost irrelevant. He still attempted occasional disruptions, but the team had developed resilience and protocols that neutralized his impact. The sense of fear he once commanded was gone, replaced by patience and strategic responses. It was remarkable to see someone who had been a dominating force reduced to mere background noise, and it served as a quiet vindication for the months of effort I had invested. Personally, I began to notice the emotional and psychological toll lifting. The constant stress and anxiety that had once been my daily companions were replaced by confidence and calm. I could focus on work without constant vigilance, and my creativity began to flourish. Projects that previously felt overwhelming now seemed manageable, and I approached challenges with clarity and measured responses. Outside of work, the positive changes spilled into my relationships. Friends and family noticed a more composed, self-assured version of me. Conversations were easier, laughter came more freely, and I had the mental space to enjoy moments without distraction. The resilience I had built in the professional arena had become a foundation for a more balanced personal life. That I also began mentoring colleagues, guiding them through difficult interpersonal dynamics, and sharing lessons on navigating toxic behavior. Many were surprised by the subtle strategies I had used, and I realized that my experiences could serve as a blueprint for others. The act of helping others reinforced my own confidence and reminded me of the power of patience, consistency, and strategic action. The cumulative victories, both small and large, gradually erased the shadow Mark had cast. Team morale soared, productivity increased, and leadership began recognizing the newfound efficiency and harmony. Observing the shift was deeply satisfying, a testament to the fact that endurance and strategic action could overcome even persistent toxicity. Through this journey, I learned that resilience isn't just about defending oneself. It's about shaping the environment with calculated patience and unwavering professionalism. The months of challenges, setbacks, and frustration had ultimately forged a stronger, wiser, and more capable version of myself. By the 10th month, the transformation within the team was undeniable. Meetings were productive, brainstorming sessions were lively, and everyone felt comfortable expressing their ideas without fear of ridicule or sabotage. I noticed the stark contrast from the earlier days, when even simple discussions felt like walking through a minefield. Now, collaboration was effortless, almost natural. Mark, increasingly isolated, seemed frustrated and powerless. His attempts to manipulate situations were met with calm, well-reasoned responses. Colleagues no longer deferred to him out of fear. They saw through his tactics and acted independently, making their own decisions confidently. Observing this shift was both satisfying and surreal. The office that had once been toxic was now thriving, a reflection of the collective resilience and strategic efforts of the team. During this period, I also began reflecting more deeply on my own growth. I had learned to navigate complex social dynamics, assert my boundaries firmly, and cultivate patience under pressure. The experiences had shaped not only my professional capabilities, but also my personal development. I recognized that my resilience and strategic thinking had been tested to the fullest, and emerging stronger from that test was incredibly empowering. Outside of work, my life began to stabilize as well. I spent more quality time with family and friends, approached challenges with a clear mind, and felt a newfound sense of control over my own narrative. The emotional exhaustion that had weighed me down for so long had lifted, replaced by focus, confidence, and a sense of accomplishment. The lessons learned during this period became ingrained habits. I approached conflicts with calm determination, communicated transparently, and maintained a strategic mindset in every interaction. These habits not only neutralized toxic influences, but also enhanced my effectiveness and credibility within the team. The transformation was complete, not overnight, but through persistent, deliberate effort. By this point, the team had reached a level of cohesion that felt almost unshakable. Projects moved seamlessly from conception to execution, and everyone seemed genuinely invested in one another's success. The atmosphere was almost palpable. Laughter mingled with focused energy, and even the most challenging deadlines were met with a sense of shared purpose rather than dread. Mark's influence had dwindled to near zero. His attempts to stir conflict were met with polite indifference or subtle deflection, and he increasingly found himself excluded from key decisions. It was strange to watch someone who had once wielded so much control become irrelevant, but it was a satisfying testament to the power of persistence, strategy, and integrity. I also began receiving recognition from leadership. My efforts in guiding the team through difficult dynamics, maintaining morale, and improving productivity were acknowledged in meetings and reviews. It wasn't about personal accolades. It was validation that the strategies I had employed worked, and that my commitment to professionalism and patience had tangible results. That on a personal level, I felt a growing sense of pride and confidence. Navigating this ordeal had strengthened my problem-solving skills, emotional intelligence, and resilience. I realized that the lessons learned during this challenging period were not just professional tools. They were life skills that would continue to serve me in any situation. The journey also fostered stronger relationships with colleagues. Bonds formed through shared challenges were deeper and more meaningful, and the team's culture of support and trust became self-sustaining. I could see that the office environment had been irrevocably changed for the better, and that our collective efforts had created a space where everyone could thrive. As the year drew to a close, I finally allowed myself to reflect fully on the journey. The tension, anxiety, and constant vigilance that had dominated my life at the beginning were now replaced with relief, pride, and a deep sense of accomplishment. The office was no longer a battleground, but a space where creativity, collaboration, and mutual respect flourished. Mark had quietly disappeared from influence, taking his bitterness with him, while I found myself unexpectedly mentoring newer team members. Sharing the strategies and experiences that had helped me survive and thrive felt rewarding, and it became clear that my story could serve as guidance for others navigating similar challenges. Personally, I had grown immensely. I understood more clearly how to set boundaries, advocate for myself, and maintain integrity under pressure. I could finally separate the past turmoil from my present and future, using the lessons learned to make better decisions and foster healthier relationships. Even my family's perception shifted over time. While they hadn't actively participated in the office ordeal, seeing my resilience and success softened some of their previous judgments. It was a quiet acknowledgement that, despite their absence, during critical moments, my accomplishments were undeniable. Looking back, the journey had been grueling, sometimes frightening, and incredibly instructive. I realized that the challenges weren't just obstacles. They were opportunities to discover strength, patience, and ingenuity I didn't know I possessed. And while the scars of the struggle remained, they were a reminder of what I had overcome and the person I had become in the process.